Alright, today I'm going to show you how to disassemble your brass eagle tiger shark and put it back together. First we're going to unscrew the air source from the rear of the marker. Next step is we're going to remove this V-neck adapter by just twisting it and pulling off. Next step is that we're going to remove these two thumb screws on either side of the bolt, which just thread in. And then this pump handle just slides right off. Set that aside. Alright, next step is to remove the barrel, just unthread that, and then we're left with the main body. Next step is to remove these three pins. The one on the bottom right is longer than these two, and so I have metal pins in mine that I upgraded to. The standard ones come with plastic. So if you have the plastic ones, if you flip it to the opposite side, I have little ball bearings in there that hold the pins in place, but if you have plastic ones, you use needle nose pliers. You squeeze on each side to squeeze the plastic together, and then as you're squeezing, you kind of just press through with the needle nose pliers. And at a certain point, you'll be able to pry it through off the other side. Of course, mine just have finger screws, or finger rings, so we're going to pull out this one, which is the long one, pull out the shorter one, pull out this shorter one. I'm going to set these aside, set aside the pliers too. Alright, so now we're able to remove the trigger frame, just slide it off the bottom. Next step is the body. So the whole bolt assembly with valve will slide out the back. You're going to have to tilt it to get the bolt out with it as well. And that's going to go right here. The body will set aside. Alright, next step, we can remove the bolt, we can remove the mainspring, and we can remove the hammer, which is what the trigger actuates. And then we're left with the air source adapter, air tube, and valve assembly. So I'm going to move those up there. This is the only piece that you need a tool for if you have those rings hanging off your gun. We're going to put one wrench here, a 19mm, and we're going to go counterclockwise to loosen it up. The rest of it should be finger tight, but that might vary depending on how old yours is. I'm going to keep on threading it here. There's one O-ring in here, which if you have air leaks coming out the barrel, it's probably that O-ring. The air source adapter is just by itself now. You can't disassemble this any further. We'll put it up there. So now we're left with the air tube, brass fitting, spring perch, and our valve spring. So the valve spring just pops off the end like that. You can substitute this out for a softer spring if you want more air, or put it in with a stiffer spring if you want less air, like if you're chronoing too high at the field. The spring perch here just on threads. You got to get a good grip on the air tube and screw counterclockwise. Depending on how old your marker is, you may need to use pliers to get that off. Just be gentle so you don't scratch it or mar it up too much. And then this brass fitting just slides off, and then you're left with the air tube. Now, to put it back together, you just do the opposite. So we're going to put the fitting back on the air tube. We're going to thread the spring perch back on. It doesn't need to be super tight, but you want to give it a good amount of torque so that way it doesn't come loose as you're putting it back into the marker, the air source adapter. Spring just slides on like that, and then you have your air source adapter. So there's one side with the little pin in the center, that's the air source side. This is where the valve goes. So the valve goes in like that, and you should be able to get the thread started on this. And once you get it started, you just turn it clockwise until you feel the O-ring seat. And then you get your wrench, give it like a little bit of an extra twist, and then you're good to go. Alright, next step, we're going to flip this over. Next step is to do the hammer, which just slides on like so. You should, if you want to do a test here, you should be able to push the hammer back and have it click up against the brass fitting, and it should return to position by itself. If it doesn't, it probably means you put the valve spring on wrong. Next step is to do the mainspring. Mainspring just slides in, goes right into the hammer. And then the next step, well, actually the bolt we're going to leave out for now, because we're going to do that separate as we're putting it back into the body. So now we get our plastic body back. The bolt we'll put in first. Before you even put the bolt in, use some Dow 33, it's O-ring lubricant. You want to make sure to use a non-petroleum based lubricant at the very least. There's one O-ring on here, and what you want to do is just put a little bit of grease all around it, so that way it's good to go. And I would also recommend putting it on the round surface here, because that's actually what's going to be sliding on the inside of the marker. It's going to be metal on plastic contact, or composite, or whatever they decided to use. The bolt, you want to make sure the threaded holes, it doesn't matter which side it goes in, but you want to make sure the threaded holes are going to line up with the slot. So you put the bolt in like so. You're going to push it in by hand, jiggle it around a little bit, and you'll see the holes lining up. And we're going to push it in the rest of the way there. Next, we're going to put in our valve assembly with mainspring. It'll slide in like this. The trigger piece should be facing down, and the longer tab should also be facing down relative to the body. So we push it in like that. We'll get this grease out of here. I'm going to push it in like that, jiggle it around a little bit. The mainspring should go inside of the bolt. You shouldn't have to force it too hard, like you can see how little pressure I'm putting, but you still have to put pressure. So you're going to hold it in like that, and while it's being held in by one of your fingers, you can get one of the short pins, not the long pin, but one of the two short pins, and push it in through the top there. And then that'll be held in place. Next step is we're going to put the trigger guard on. The trigger guard literally just goes in like that. You should be able to just push it in together and see that one hole lines up there and the second hole will line up here. So we're going to squeeze it together like this. We're going to put the long pin, the one long pin, in through this bottom right hole, in the bottom right. We're going to put this shorter pin in the front. Alright, next step we're going to do, we're going to put the barrel on. Just going to put that in there and thread it. Make sure it's snug. Doesn't need to be too tight. Next we got our handle. So I'm going to show you here, there's two sides, right? There's one with this notch in it and there's one without a notch. The one with the notch used to go on the side with the feed neck adapter. So you insert it over the barrel. The notch side is going to go under the feed neck, and the holes should line up with the bolt, the threaded bolt holes on either side of the marker. If it's not lined up, if for some reason the bolt moved, you can actually get your finger in there and like wiggle it around, and you can try to get the bolt to line up. Otherwise you have to pull the whole thing out again and get it to line up and push it back in. Alright, so next step is to get our two thumb screws, which I'll show you here. It doesn't matter which thumb screw goes on each side, they're both the same. Screw that in clockwise. Screw this one in clockwise. You don't have to do it too tight. It's not really going to come loose on the field. Alright, and if you want to give it a quick test, you should be able to pump back, and when you let go, it'll return back to position. If it does not return back to position, it probably means you put the mainspring in wrong. Either it's not seated in the bolt correctly, or you maybe put it behind the hammer. I don't know, but you want to disassemble it and check it out. Again, just going to show you here, I'm not letting it return to position. I'm letting go, returning by itself. Next up, we're going to do our feed neck adapter. So it's going to be hard to show in the video, but there's actually two sides to this, and it's important which one goes where. There's one that's labeled 1.030 inches, and there's one that's labeled 1.00 inches. The one that's labeled 1.0 should just slide on top there. And then the one that's labeled 1.030 should be facing straight up. So that way you can fit a hopper on. Finally, you're going to get your air source, in which case I have my CO2 adapter. Just going to pump it on there. Again, and while you have it out, make sure that O-ring is in decent condition. I just replaced it, so I know it's good. If you screw it in, if you screw in your air source, and it starts leaking out this fitting, that means you need to replace that O-ring. Maybe put some grease, or at the very least some paintball oil on it. Alright, and that is how you reassemble and disassemble Brass Eagle Tiger Shark.